On March 18, 2026, Iranian missiles slammed into Qatar's biggest energy facility, the largest LNG export facility in the world.
Qatar says Iran conducted a ballistic missile attack.
Gas facilities have both been damaged.
The damage was so huge, Qatar estimates it could take up to 5 years to fully repair everything, while at the same time losing tens of billions in future revenues. Oil and gas prices around the world shot up overnight. But Qatar hadn't even attacked Iran. So why did they become a target? And here's what makes this story even more interesting. At the exact moment those missiles hit, Qatar was in the final stages of their biggest energy megaproject in history. They're building 8 brand new mega LNG trains. Facilities so large and complex, the whole project will cost more than $40 billion. Years of construction, tens of billions of dollars invested, over 45,000 people from across the world working together. And the first megatrain was just months away from producing LNG. So how did it all fall apart? And how are they now planning to finish this massive mega project amid an escalating conflict in the region? Let's find out. Just a few decades ago, Qatar looked like this. It was just a small, isolated desert peninsula under British rule, with a few fishing towns and a modest pearling industry. Most of the country was flat, dry and sparsely populated. Just desert spanning more than 100 kilometers surrounded by the sea. But that began to change in 1940, when oil was discovered in the country. Qatar's economy slowly transformed and modern industries began to pop up. But despite the oil boom, Qatar was still a relatively small producer compared to its neighbors like Saudi Arabia or Iran. The real transformation came decades later, because just off the coast underneath the seabed sat something that would change the course of Qatar's history forever. In 1971, geologists discovered a massive offshore gas reservoir beneath the Gulf. At first, they didn't fully understand its true size. But over time, it became clear that this wasn't just an ordinary discovery. It was gigantic. This is the North Field, or South Pars gas field, depending on which side of the Gulf you're on. Despite the different names, it's actually the exact same underground reservoir. Qatar controls this part, while Iran controls the other. This gas field is so massive, its area is more than 80% the size of Qatar itself. And they control roughly 2/3 of all that. But more than the size of the field itself is the amount of natural gas trapped underground. This gas field is estimated to have more than 50,000 cubic kilometers of natural gas. That's enough natural gas to cover 13 years of global gas demand. An almost unimaginable amount of energy concentrated in one of the most geopolitically tense regions on Earth. And despite all the conflicts in the Middle East, operations at this gas field largely continued uninterrupted. And for good reason. For Iran, it supplied a significant amount of their energy needs. And for Qatar, this gas field would go on to completely transform the entire country. But that transformation didn't come instantly. The North Field was discovered in 1971, but Qatar didn't start exporting LNG until 1997, over 26 years later. That's because the infrastructure needed is both expensive and very hard to build. Unlike oil, natural gas is incredibly difficult to transport. You can't just simply pump it into a tanker and call it a day. To ship gas across oceans, it first has to be cooled to around -162 degrees Celsius until it becomes a liquid. This process is called liquefaction. Liquefaction is done inside giant industrial facilities like this one. These are known as LNG trains. At a glance, they look like really complex machines, and they definitely are. But the principles behind how they work are actually pretty easy to understand. The process begins offshore. Raw natural gas is extracted from deep beneath the seabed and transported through massive underwater pipelines toward the coast. But the gas coming out of the ground isn't pure. It contains things like water, sulfur and other hydrocarbons. If these substances remain inside the system during cooling, they can freeze solid and damage equipment. So they first need to be removed. Next, the purified gas enters giant compressor trains like this one. Here, the gas is cooled until it transforms into a liquid. Once liquefied, natural gas shrinks to roughly 1/600th of its original volume. This makes it way easier and more efficient to transport. The liquid is then pumped into massive insulated storage tanks near the coast, waiting to be loaded onto ships. From there, giant LNG tankers transport the fuel across the world to wherever they're needed. Qatar perfected this simple yet painstaking process, and all of it was centered around one place, Ras Laffan Industrial City. It's located around 80 kilometers north of Doha. 30 years ago, this place was just an empty stretch of coastline with no real strategic importance. But because it's located right next to the North Field, it has now become the biggest LNG export facility in the world. Ras Laffan alone produces about 20% of the world's LNG. And that's thanks to a total of 14 LNG trains with a combined capacity of 77 million tons of LNG per year. Each LNG train can cost anywhere between $5 and $10 billion to construct. Building even a single one requires years of engineering, thousands of workers, and supply chains spanning multiple continents. Qatar has 14 of them, all concentrated in this one location. You probably see the problem that I'll get to in a moment. LNG already made Qatar one of the wealthiest countries on Earth, but they wanted more than that. In the early 20s, Qatar announced the North Field Expansion Project, a three-phase plan with the goal of nearly doubling the country's LNG production. In total, the project will create an additional 8 mega LNG trains, each with a capacity of 8 million tons per year. Once fully complete, this expansion will increase Qatar's LNG production from 77 million tons per year to more than 140 million. To pull this off, Qatar assembled one of the largest energy partnerships in modern history. Several companies from the US, Europe and Asia all joined together to work on this project. Some reports estimated that around 45,000 workers were involved in the North Field East phase alone. All of this construction was happening while Qatar was expanding its LNG tanker fleet. Since they expected to double their LNG production, Qatar ordered more than 100 ships to meet that demand. That alone is an investment worth tens of billions of dollars. Okay, let's jump to this year. By early 2026, construction of the first mega LNG train was well underway, and it was expected to be operational before the end of the year. Years of construction were finally nearing completion. The first exports were expected in just a few months. But at almost the exact same moment, this happened.
Air and destruction across the Middle East this Saturday night.
United States called it Operation Epic Fury.
In February, the US and Israel started attacking Iran. The conflict began with a series of airstrikes that killed their supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The conflict then escalated and spilled into neighboring countries. And on March 18th, the war reached a major turning point. The US and Israel hit multiple Iranian gas and oil sites across its southern coast. This included infrastructure connecting to the South Pars gas field. For Iran, this attack was devastating. South Pars is quite literally the country's lifeline. Unlike Qatar's North Field, where most of the gas is exported, Iran relies on the field to power itself. It supplies fuel for power plants across the country, supports major industries, and provides energy for tens of millions of people. As much as 80% of Iran's natural gas comes from this place alone. And because of the attack, they lost 12% of their total gas capacity. From Iran's perspective, this changed the rules of the war completely. Before the attack on South Pars, most of the fighting was only between military targets. So when those facilities were hit, the response was immediate. Within just a few hours, Iran retaliated. Missiles were launched across the Persian Gulf towards Qatar. Their target, the center of Qatar's LNG operations, Ras Laffan. The attack was aimed directly at critical energy infrastructure. 2 out of Qatar's 14 existing LNG trains worth $26 billion were damaged in the strike. These 2 trains represent around 17% of the country's total LNG capacity. And this is where the scale of the problem really starts to become clear. LNG trains are not something you can just quickly rebuild. As I mentioned before, these are complex machines that take years to construct, even under normal conditions. And now all of this is happening in the middle of a war. Qatar says it would take up to 5 years before the damaged trains can be used again. Another facility known as the Pearl GTL was also hit in the same attack. GTL stands for gas to liquids, a process that converts natural gas into different liquid products, such as kerosene or engine oils. According to Shell, one of the 2 trains could take up to a year to be fully repaired. But these are not the only major energy projects in Qatar delayed by the war. About 100 kilometers from the east coast is the Meydan Mazam oil field, one of Qatar's oldest offshore producing assets that first went online in the 1960s. Now, decades later, its productivity has slowly deteriorated. The oil field itself still has reserves, but with the current infrastructure, it only has until 2027 before it reaches its limit. Because of this, Qatar approved a $4 billion program designed to extend its lifetime by another 30 years. They're doing this by constructing new offshore platforms and underwater pipelines. The project was already in its advanced bidding stages when the war began. This means companies were already preparing to submit their plans for construction. But as the conflict escalated across the Gulf, everything became uncertain. Right now, it's still unclear when construction could actually begin. Though the project is not yet cancelled, it's now basically stuck in limbo, along with several other energy projects across the country. Iran's attack on Ras Laffan raises a major question. Why Qatar? After all, Qatar itself hadn't attacked Iran. But geopolitically, the answer is much more complicated. One possible reason was military alignment. Qatar hosts the single biggest US military base in the Middle East, Al Udeid Air Base. Even if Qatar did not attack Iran, they still might view them as a close US ally. But there may have been an even bigger objective behind all of this: global energy prices. A huge percentage of the world's oil and LNG pass through the Persian Gulf every single day. And almost all of it flows through one critical choke point: the Strait of Hormuz. At this point, almost everyone has heard of it. Whenever tensions rise in the Middle East, the strait immediately becomes part of the conversation. Oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE and Iran itself all pass through here. So does most of Qatar's oil and LNG exports. This means that if Iran blocked the strait, the effects are felt almost instantly across the entire world. Oil and gas prices surged when Iran blocked the strait at the beginning of the war. We all felt this with rising costs of fuel and electricity. But closing Hormuz was only one part of the equation. The second part was hitting the target directly at its source. When Iran struck Ras Laffan, it wasn't just targeting Qatar. They also attacked other oil and gas infrastructure across the Gulf. Their strategy here is quite simple. The Strait of Hormuz disrupts the transportation of energy, but attacks on refineries, LNG trains and export terminals disrupt the production of energy itself. This way, the war became even more expensive for everyone, and for Iran, that pressure can become a weapon in itself. Governments around the world now face a lot of pressure to de-escalate the conflict, simply to stabilize markets again. Yet, even after everything that happened, Qatar has committed itself to continuing the North Field expansion. They cannot simply walk away. Too much money has already been invested, and too much of the country's future depends on it. Just recently in April, a major contract was awarded to American energy company Baker Hughes. Continuing construction during an active conflict creates an entirely new set of problems. Ras Laffan has already been hit once, so the workers here are in real danger. And it also means anything they build could potentially become another target. Qatar does have defense systems in place for attacks like this, but the events of March 18th prove there's still room to improve. This massive gas field isn't going anywhere. But whether Qatar can finish what they started, and at what cost, may be one of the biggest energy stories of this decade. But what do you think? Will Qatar's expansion survive this war and reshape the global energy market? Let me know in the comments down below. I really appreciate everyone who tuned in, and I hope you were able to get some new information out of this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.